It's one of the rare times that I've gotten in a retro of a shoe that I've never owned before, ever. And I never really wanted to either, but they seem pretty good. Hey, what's good guys? My name's Chris. Welcome back to the official WearTesters.com YouTube channel. Today we got a detailed look and review on a shoe I've never owned before. This is my first time with these guys. I think it's amazing. This, my friends, is the Adidas Gil Zero Restomod, which means...
It's basically a Pro-Tro, but for Adidas.
Yes, that's fine. Yep.
If you want to really know, it means that the guts have been changed for the better, while the outside is still the same.
Well, if you really want to know, Restomod
It's a car term.
is a car term for people that restore but modify classic cars. So yeah, it's a Pro-Tro.
You're welcome.
That sounded like it would have made a great segment on a podcast, which is kind of convenient because that's today's sponsor.
Excellent.
Today's sponsor is the good folks over at the Basketball Strong Podcast. Now, the Basketball Strong Podcast, for those of you guys that don't know, was started by two individuals. I should have just done one hand. That kind of means four.
Oops, sorry.
But it was started by two really cool individuals, one of which, his name is Tim. I'm not gonna say his last name because I just tried and I butchered it, so sorry. People call him TD, and he's a doctor of physical therapy. He used to work for the Los Angeles Lakers. He was their strength coach, and he was actually there for Kobe's last 4 seasons. So yes, he was actually there rehabbing Kobe during his whole Achilles thing. So I think that's really interesting. He's also worked with guys like Steve Nash, Pau Gasol, Julius Randle, and obviously the rest of the teammates that were on those teams during those last 4 years of Kobe's career. Now, TD had teamed up with Phil White, who is an Emmy-nominated writer. Both of them host this Basketball Strong podcast, which is a really interesting podcast because, again, it's all about being basketball strong. So whatever it takes for that particular person or guest to get there with that mindset is something that they both deep dive into, which I think is actually fascinating. They've had some really incredible guests on their show as well. Guys Byron Russell, Steve Blake, and this other guy named Nightwing2303. Like, who the f is that guy?
Somebody that I used to know.
Jesus, you couldn't even hit the one note. You couldn't hit the pitch. It was that was awful. But like I was saying before, each podcast, they have these guests on their show. They really do deep dive into all of the person's nuances from beginning to end. Like for me personally, like we literally started at the beginning. I talked about stuff that I've never really talked about with anybody before. And then the ending was obviously where we're at now, which is really cool if you wanted to know stories like that. Maybe it'll inspire you, maybe it'll motivate you. Maybe you're going through some tough times, and knowing that all of these people also have been through their own fair share of tough shit, but have been able to mentally prepare and work their way through it, then the Basketball Strong podcast might be a great podcast for you. The podcast is available right now on all platforms, so whatever platform you listen to, it should be there. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at these bad boys right here. Potential bad boys. Sorry, I didn't want to get anybody like too excited. It's not like that yet. But again, these guys right here are the Adidas Gil Zero Restomod. This shoe originally released back in 2006. There are a couple of really cool fun facts about the shoe that I think are just very fascinating, one of which is going to lead into a question for you guys, so be prepared. But the first one is that these things use 4Motion. Adidas is 4Motion, something that they don't really use in basketball or footwear products anymore. Instead, it's turned into some kind of weird like apparel line to promote motion and things like that. I think that the concept of it though for footwear is really interesting. The second thing is that this was one of the first signature shoes that actually had a lot of PEs and a lot of themes behind them. Like for each colorway, there was a story to be told. This particular one is the hibachi one. It's got like a weird like Gilbert Arenas face in there with like a chef hat and everything like that. Apparently he likes eating at hibachi grills, I don't know. And the interesting part about that is that back in 2006 when this shoe originally debuted, that type of thing wasn't actually around yet. So this is like the early days of sneaker blogging. Like I'm talking about like it might be the birth year of sneaker blogs if I'm not mistaken, which I could be, but I'm pretty sure. So I think that that's really interesting because this is what we see on every release now. There's always a theme to every colorway, even colorways that are retro colorways like original ones that never had real themes before. They're now making up stories like Moonlight and like that. So this shoe or this model just kind of like paved the way for all that crap. So thanks, Adidas.
You monster.
The last thing that I think is really interesting is that I believe this is one of the only signature basketball shoes to debut in a low top. I don't think that there has been another one. This is where I pose to you this question, which I don't want speculation. I want facts, okay? I don't want, I think. No, I need to know. I did look it up, but I didn't have that much time, so I could not find anything. And I went through my own Rolodex of memory, and I don't think that there was another low top signature that debuted like as a low.
The first shoe.
The first shoe.
Okay.
The Jordan 1 was clearly not a low.
The Kobe is not a low.
The Kobe 1 is not a low. Even his Adidas stuff, the KB line, not a low. None of Adidas's like Addy Power Howard stuff was lows.
What about Dame?
Ooh, that's a low. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, that was slick. What else is there? LaMelo shoes, not a low. Curry, not a low. Clay, not a low. I don't know if Gordon Hayward's shoe was technically a low. That was kind of a mid.
What about Rose?
That's the thing. So that's the one where it's kind of, because the Adidas D Rose 1 technically was a low, but it had the GeoFit collar, which made it a mid. That's the one where I'm kind of like, it depends on how you perceive that. But the main point is that I don't think there's been many. Jordan was one of the first ones to really make lows a thing. He used to switch his shoes in the middle of the games from mids to lows. He liked the freedom and range of motion. He did it on a regular basis. Towards the end of his career, he ended up with PEs that looked exactly like the mids, so you didn't even notice that there was a shoe change. Clever girl. We were watching tube TVs, not HD 4Ks and all this other shit, so it was impossible to tell. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting because I really don't remember too many shoes debuting as low tops. So Gilbert was one of the first ones to do it. Now, with all that being said, the traction doesn't feel like it's gonna be anything special, but it also could be very surprising. This is not what I consider to be aggressive traction, even though it is like herringbone and then, you know, radial and all that stuff. So in my mind, I think this could work really well, but at the same time, it's recessed into the rubber. Whereas a lot of modern day shoes like this Air Jordan 36, it's mostly like the rubber is carved away from the traction instead of the traction being carved into the rubber. So this is what I consider to be like really aggressive traction where you get a lot of bite and grip no matter what. Like there's always contact with the floor. This one right here is where if dust gets in there, it's gonna stay in there because it's not free flowing and all of that stuff. So I don't know how this is gonna perform for the average consumer on the average floor, but I sure hope it's good because a lot of people love this shoe. And again, I've never owned them, so I'm very curious about that. Also, by the way, I did get these from my good friends over at ID for Shoes. They had them listed. I bought them right away as soon as I saw them, and they got here really fast. I don't even think that we get to do Walmart pickups that fast. Like I was shocked. They delivered on a Memorial. Like why were they even working? Now the cushion is something that I think is really interesting because it blends, you know, the old with the new. So Adidas's 4Motion is something that we really don't see anymore. I had to do a lot of research, so we do have some video clips of really old Adidas promo things for different shoes. They were for running shoes though. I don't see how that type of 4Motion is going to work with this type of 4Motion, but we'll find out eventually. At least I hope so. But anyways, what we have here is a EVA carrier, which you can see it primarily on the lateral side and everything, a little bit on the medial side, but that's also where you really see the 4Motion. So the 4Motion are these pods right here. They did add Boost to the shoe, which is the whole Restomod aspect of the thing. I thought that Boost was going to be somehow full length or stuck in these little like 4Motion pods or whatever, like how the Pure Motion stuff is set up, how I would have done it. It's not like that though. Instead, the Boost is isolated to the heel. It's just in a puck. It's tiny. And I was kind of like, I mean, I know that technically that you changed things and that you updated things or upgraded things, but I don't know, man, like that to me doesn't feel like a true Restomod, like the T-Max stuff. That's full bounce. The whole midsole's bounce. That's something that I also think is interesting too, is that there's 3 tiers to the Restomod stuff. The D Rose Restomods have been using Light Strike. The T-Max stuff has been using a mixture between boost and bounce, but primarily bounce lately. And now these guys are kind of like the boost version of the Restomod. So you got all 3 of their tech features in all 3 of their Restomod lines.
They should have given like a boost insole.
I was thinking of something more boosty than what we actually got. I can feel it if I really press my heel down, but I also never really strike like that unless I'm going to slow down or stop. And most people are like that, like it's just kind of natural, like how your brain and your foot works. The 4Motion pods, which you can see right here, there's only 3 of them. I cannot tell what they're made out of. They feel real rubbery, so I don't know if it's a rubber material or if it's a polyurethane material. It could be either one. They are somewhat isolated isolated and separated to themselves. This particular one up in the forefoot area feels like it's combined with like a plastic plate. It could also just be part of that whatever material it is, the polyurethane or the rubber, like moving outwards and connecting to the rubber right here. But essentially what I was seeing in the promo stuff for the running lines, which were primarily heel-based foremotion, is that when you do strike like a runner, you strike like this, the foremotion pod is a separate piece, and then it will move, so it kind of like keeps you moving. So when you run and you do a heel strike, this is your braking motion. So if you're doing that, you're shocking or sending shock upwards toward your body, which is why there is heel cushion. And then you're rolling into your forefoot stride and then exploding or moving forward, hence the foremotion thing. So when you're striking incorrectly, I guess that was supposed to be a way to correct it. That way you stay in motion the whole time instead of breaking your stride and then moving back into motion. So that's what I kind of have gotten from the promo stuff. How that's going to work here in those little tiny pods, I don't really know. Like, I think that's interesting. Maybe it's lateral movements, like maybe you're, and then I don't know, like I think it's kind of weird. Something I do think is very interesting though is that this black section right here is actually the outrigger. So it's not right there in the forefoot area, it's more so in the midfoot. It is rubber. On top of that, it's not any of the foam. And so I think that's really cool, because I guess when you have the other side of it being the motion aspect, you need something to stabilize it. So that's why I was kind of like, why would you need these to move with you so that you can then move? I just didn't understand. So like, I don't know, like for basketball, I don't see how foremotion makes sense. At the same time, we don't see footwear with foremotion anymore, so maybe the whole thing was a bust. I don't know. I mean, it's not the first time Adidas has put out cushion that sucked. Now the materials are actually quite interesting. Adidas typically uses mostly synthetics. Even back in my high school days, like all those shoes were primarily synthetics. Even the signature models. This one particularly has actual leather on there. So all of the red areas that you're seeing are actual red leather, which I think is really cool. It made me feel like I got a quality purchase right there just off of materials alone. The downside though is that Adidas's main thing that they love to do, besides with their sizing inconsistencies, is their material inconsistencies. They like to use different materials on every shoe no matter what, so you'll probably get a different experience from one colorway to the next, and I'm not testing them all, so this is just what this one is. I do think that the black sections are really interesting because it's all woven material, so it's very similar to something like the Jordan 15. Woven is a really good thing for like stretch, because it doesn't have any. The more force that you put on it, the tighter it gets, but it remains flexible and breathable. So I think that that's really cool. So it's gonna allow for minimal break-in period, but having all of the support structure with all the overlays of leather. As far as sizing is concerned, believe it or not, these actually fit true to size. They fit perfect on top of that. So I am very curious to know how these play. They feel okay right now, by the way. They don't feel like super comfortable or anything. Like I said, the boost is isolated, the heel, the forefoot's is kind of Outside of that though, it's a very popular model for Adidas basketball, so I'm glad to see them back finally, especially for the people that have been waiting for these, because these have been rumored to be re-releasing forever, and they're finally here. Oh my God, But with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all the support. Thank you so much for being here, especially since this is not a Nike or a Jordan, thank goodness. It was getting really rough for me, guys. The Jordan 1 is the top, like I have like about 7 pairs of Jordan 1s that I'm supposed to talk about, and I didn't want to talk about any of them. So this to me is like a breath of fresh air. But anyways, thank you once again for everything, and until next time, guys, have a good one.